On a sunny March morning in San Francisco, something extraordinary was about to happen at the Golden State Warriors Gymnasium. What began as a common international basketball clinic would transform into one of the most touching moments in sports history, a moment that no one present would ever be able to forget. Have you ever wondered what happens when two completely different worlds meet through their love for basketball? In that gymnasium, surrounded by the familiar aroma of burnt rubber, from sneakers against the polished floor, and the echo of balls bouncing in harmony, 500 children from dozens of different countries waited anxiously to meet their idol, Steph Curry. The International Youth Basketball Clinic was an annual event that brought together young talents from around the world for a unique experience with one of basketball's greatest names. It was possible to perceive that the energy in the air was different that morning. There was a mixture of expectation, nervousness, and pure joy that only children can radiate when they're about to realize a dream. Robert Kim, the event's main organizer who had coordinated these clinics for 8 years, walked through the backstage, adjusting the final details. Something that deeply touches is when you realize you're organizing moments that will change lives forever. He had no idea he was about to witness something that would redefine his understanding of sport's transformative power. "Children from 43 different countries," murmured James Wilson, production assistant, while observing the sea of anxious young faces filling the bleachers. How is it possible that a single passion, basketball, can unite cultures, languages, and dreams so diverse in a single space? In the middle of that multicultural crowd, one boy stood out not for being different, but for his almost meditative concentration. Wei Zhang, 13 years old, was sitting in the third row, his eyes fixed on the gymnasium entrance, where Steph Curry would appear. It was impossible not to notice the intensity in his gaze. It wasn't just fan admiration, it was something much deeper and more determined. Carlos Mendez, assistant coach who had worked with international young talents for 15 years, observed Wei with growing curiosity. "That Chinese boy there," he commented to Anthony Zhang, international coordinator. "There's something different about him. He's not just waiting to meet Curry, it's as if he's preparing for something." Naturally, this leads us to the moment that would change everything. When Steph Curry finally entered the gymnasium, the sound was deafening. 500 children screaming, applauding, some crying with emotion. But Wei Zhang remained silent, his eyes following every movement of his idol with a precision that made it seem like he was memorizing even the way Curry breathed. "Good morning, future champions!" Curry shouted to the crowd, his voice carrying that unique mixture of humility and charisma that made him so beloved around the world. It was possible to feel how his presence instantly transformed the gymnasium's atmosphere, as if hope itself had gained physical form. What impresses most is how some people can radiate light even in already illuminated environments. Kevin O'Connor, the event's official photographer, adjusted his lenses trying to capture not just images, but the pure energy that emanated from that historic moment. During the first hour, Curry conducted basic exercises, shared shooting techniques, and interacted with dozens of children. Each of his smiles provoked waves of joy that spread through the bleachers like ripples on a calm lake. But Wei Zhang continued observing, analyzing, as if he were studying for the most important exam of his life. "This boy isn't just watching," observed Daniel Patel, sports psychologist who accompanied the event to study young athlete behavior. "He's absorbing every detail like a sponge. The intensity of concentration he maintains is impressive." How many times in life do you witness a child demonstrating determination that rivals that of professional athletes. Christopher Lee, former NBA player who was present as a special guest, had noticed Wei since the beginning of the event. There was something in the boy's posture that reminded him of himself when he was young and obsessed with basketball. It was then that something happened that no one expected. During a break in activities, while Curry drank water and talked with other organizers, Wei Zhang stood up from his seat. His steps were deliberate, confident, as if he had rehearsed that moment 1,000 times in his mind. Ryan Johnson, event security, instinctively approached, but something in the boy's determined but respectful expression made him pause. It was possible to perceive that Wei wasn't being disrespectful or impulsive. He was executing a plan he had cultivated for a long time. "Excuse me, Mr. Curry," Wei said in Abiziwam clear English, but with a perceptible Chinese accent. His voice echoed through the silent gymnasium, making 500 heads turn simultaneously in his direction. "My name is Wei Zhang. I'm 13 years old, and I came from China specifically to meet you." Curry turned, an automatic smile forming on his face. The type of smile he gave to thousands of young fans. But when his eyes met Wei's, something changed. There was an intensity in that boy that transcended common fan admiration. "Hello, Wei," Curry responded warmly, crouching down to be at the boy's eye level. "It's a pleasure to meet you. How are you enjoying the clinic?" Something that deeply touches is when a child gathers courage to do something that will change their life forever. Wei took a deep breath, as if he were gathering 8 years of dreams into a single declaration. "Mr. Curry," Wei said, his voice now carrying a conviction that made the entire gymnasium fall completely silent. "I have studied each of your movements for 8 years. I train 8 hours a day. I make 95% of my three-point shots, and I would like to challenge you to a competition." The silence that followed was absolute. It was possible to hear even the almost imperceptible humming of the gymnasium's ventilation system. Steven Rodriguez, sports journalist covering the event, felt a chill run down his spine. In 20 years of career, he had never witnessed a moment of such pure and unexpected tension. Curry blinked several times, clearly processing what he had just heard. A 13-year-old boy from China had just publicly challenged him to a basketball competition. How is it possible that such an unlikely situation could carry so much emotional intensity? "A competition?" Curry repeated, not with disbelief, but with genuine curiosity. It was possible to perceive that he was trying to understand not just the request, but also the extraordinary courage that had been necessary to make it. "Yes, sir," Wei responded. And now there were discreet tears in his eyes. Not tears of fear or sadness, but tears of the type that arise when someone is about to realize a dream that seemed impossible. "Three-point shots, 10 attempts each. If I lose, I will never bother anyone again with my dream of playing basketball professionally." Great things happen when no one is looking, but sometimes the greatest transformations happen when a child has enough courage to challenge their own limitations in front of 500 witnesses and their greatest idol. Matthew Brown, former university coach who was present as an observer, felt a lump in his throat. What would you do if a child bet their deepest dreams on a single moment of courage? Curry looked around the gymnasium, seeing 500 children holding their breath, then looked back at Wei. There was something in that boy's determination that touched something deep in his own heart. Perhaps memories of when he himself was underestimated for his size, when others said his dreams were too big for his physical stature. "Wei," Curry finally said, his voice now loaded with a respect that transcended age or experience. "Before accepting your challenge, I would like to know something. Why is this so important to you?" It was impossible not to feel that this question carried decades of wisdom about what truly motivates real athletes. Andrew Davis, youth minister who had brought a group of children to the event, recognized in the interaction between Curry and Wei something that completely transcended sport. "Because, Mr. Curry," Wei responded, and now his voice trembled slightly with contained emotion, "my family sacrificed everything to bring me here, and I need to prove that their sacrifices were worth it." And it was at that moment that everyone in the gymnasium realized they weren't just witnessing an improvised sports challenge. They were witnessing the meeting of two souls who, despite being separated by age, culture, and circumstances, shared the same pure passion for basketball and the same understanding about the weight of dreams and family responsibilities. Great things happen when no one is looking. And at that moment, while Curry processed Wei's words, everyone could feel that something extraordinary was about to happen. Something that would change not just those two, but would also deeply touch every person present, and, eventually, millions around the world. But what happened next would change everything, forever. Steph Curry remained silent for almost 20 complete seconds, an eternity when 500 people are holding their breath. It was possible to perceive that he was processing not just the challenge itself, but also the extraordinary courage and emotional weight behind that 13-year-old boy's words. "Wei," Curry finally said, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and admiration that made the entire gymnasium lean in closer. "In all my years playing basketball, from childhood to the NBA, I have never received a challenge that carried as much heart as yours. Have you ever wondered what separates true champions from simply good players?" At that moment, everyone could witness. True champions recognize greatness, regardless of where it comes from, and respond with humility instead of ego. "I accept your challenge," Curry announced, and the deafening roar that exploded from the bleachers made the building itself seem to vibrate. Joshua Miller, the event's sound engineer, had to quickly adjust the equipment to accommodate the surreal volume of 500 children screaming simultaneously. Wei Zhang closed his eyes for a moment, as if he needed to process that his most impossible dream had just become reality. When he opened them again, there was a determination in them that transcended his age. It was the determination of someone who had trained every day for the last 8 years for this exact moment. "But first," Curry continued, raising his hand to silence, "the crowd, I would like you to tell me a little about your journey. How does a 13-year-old boy from China become so good at three-point shots? Something that deeply touches is when someone demonstrates genuine interest in the story behind talent." Brian Garcia, documentarian who was capturing the event, realized he was recording something much more significant than a basketball clinic. He was documenting a meeting of souls through sport. Wei took a deep breath, as if he were organizing 8 years of memories into a coherent narrative. "Mr. Curry, when I was 5 years old, my father showed me a video of you making impossible shots for the Golden State Warriors. I told him, 'Dad, I want to play like that man.'" Paul Martinez, youth basketball coach, who had brought a delegation from Central America, felt a familiar chill. How is it possible that a 5-year-old child makes a decision that will define their entire life, and then has the discipline to follow that decision for 8 consecutive years? "Since then," Wei continued, his voice gaining strength as he remembered his journey, "I train every day. I wake up at 5 in the morning, train 2 hours before school. I come home, do homework, and train 6 more hours until bedtime. Weekends, I train 10 hours a day. The silence in the gymnasium was different now. It was no longer expectation, but reverence. Kenneth Jones, sports psychologist specialized in young athlete development, had never heard such extreme dedication in someone so young. It was possible to feel the weight of 8 years of absolute discipline echoing through that boy's simple words. 10 hours a day? Curry asked, clearly impressed. Way, that's more than many professional players train. What gives you this motivation? Naturally, this leads us to the moment that revealed the emotional depth behind Way's dedication. His eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of that complex emotion that arises when someone talks about people they love more than their own life. My father works 16 hours a day in a factory to pay for my basketball lessons, Way revealed, and now his voice trembled slightly with contained emotion. My mother sells food on the street every night to pay for my uniform and equipment. They never told me to stop, never complained, but I see the fatigue in their eyes. Thomas Anderson, father of 3 children who was present with his family, felt tears sprouting in his own eyes. What impresses most is how some stories manage to touch the universal experience of parental love and family sacrifice, regardless of culture or nationality. That's why I train so much, Way continued, because every shot I miss is 1 more hour my parents will have to work. Every movement that isn't perfect is a wasted sacrifice. I cannot fail them. It was impossible not to feel that this boy carried an emotional weight that not even adults should carry. Gregory Taylor, school counselor who had worked with academic pressure in young people, recognized in Way's speech a responsibility that transcended any normal childhood expectation. Way, Curry said softly, and there was a tenderness in his voice that revealed he perfectly understood that pressure. You have already proven that your parents' sacrifices were worth it. The fact that you're here, speaking perfect English, having the courage to challenge me publicly, that's already a victory. How many times in life do you witness someone receiving validation exactly when they need it most? Nicholas White, minister who worked with immigrant families, could see relief and gratitude spreading across Way's face, like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. But I still want to see these legendary shots, Curry continued with a smile that mixed challenge and encouragement. Shall we go to the court? The walk to the 3-point line was different from any other in Way's life. Each step echoed through the silent gymnasium like beats of an accelerated heart. Jonathan Harris, former college player who was present as a special guest, remembered the sensation of walking toward moments that would define his life, and recognized that same intensity in Way's posture. Simple rules, Curry announced to the crowd. 10 shots each, from different positions on the 3-point line. Whoever makes more wins. Samuel Clark, certified referee who was present as a volunteer, assumed the role of improvised official. It was possible to perceive that even he was nervous. In decades of refereeing games, he had never witnessed a competition with so much emotional weight concentrated in so few minutes. Way held the ball for the first time, and something magical happened. All the nervousness, all the pressure, all the emotion seemed to dissipate instantly. His hands found the ball as if it were a natural extension of his body, the result of 8 years of obsessive repetition. You can start whenever you want, Way, Curry said, positioning himself beside to observe. Way's first shot was perfect. The ball described a high and smooth arc, cutting through the air with mathematical precision before going through the basket without even touching the rim. The sound was that pure swoosh that every basketball player recognizes as celestial music. Benjamin Lewis, sports biomechanics analyst who was studying shooting techniques, was speechless. Wei's form was technically perfect. Aligned elbow, fluid follow-through, impeccable ball rotation. It was like watching 8 years of dedicated practice manifesting in pure movement. "Wow," Curry murmured, clearly impressed. "That was perfect." The second shot was equally precise. The third, too. When Wei made his 5th consecutive shot, a murmur of admiration began to spread through the bleachers. Timothy Walker, basketball scout who had seen thousands of young players, had never witnessed such extraordinary consistency in someone so young. "My God," whispered David Rodriguez, coach of an elite academy in Los Angeles. "He really makes 95%. This isn't child exaggeration. This is reality." When Wei completed his series with 9 hits in 10 attempts, missing only the last one due to pure nervousness, the gymnasium exploded in applause. But what impressed most wasn't just the accuracy, it was the emotional maturity with which he had dealt with the pressure. "Your turn, Mr. Curry," Wei said respectfully, extending the ball to his idol. Curry took the ball, but before starting his series, he did something unexpected. He turned to Wei and said something that only the boy could hear, something that made Wei's eyes fill with tears again. Great things happen when no one is looking. But sometimes the greatest lessons about sport and life happen when a world champion whispers words of encouragement to a child who dared to dream too big for their size. Curry began his own series of shots, but it was possible to perceive that something had changed in the atmosphere. It was no longer about competition. It was about two people who had connected through their shared passion and mutual respect. When Curry made his 10 consecutive shots, something expected from one of the greatest shooters in NBA history, Wei didn't show frustration or disappointment. Instead, he applauded with genuine admiration, as if he were watching art being created before his eyes. "Technical tie," Curry announced to the crowd. "But before we decide who really won, Wei, I would like to know more about your family. Where are they now?" And it was in this apparently innocent question that Wei's expression changed completely. Michael Thompson, counselor who had worked with families in crisis, immediately recognized that expression. It was the expression of someone who was about to share a truth that would change everything. No one could imagine that this moment would be the turning point. The change in Wei Zhang's expression was instantaneous and devastating. In a fraction of a second, the joy of competition transformed into something much heavier. A mixture of sadness, fear, and hopelessness that made the entire gymnasium realize that something deeply serious was about to be revealed. "My family?" Wei began, but his voice failed. He swallowed hard, as if he were trying to swallow tears that refused to be contained. It was possible to perceive that every word he was about to say carried the weight of months of anxiety and silent worry. Have you ever wondered what it's like to carry a secret so heavy that just talking about it can break your heart? Steph Curry, perceiving the drastic change in the boy's mood, instinctively knelt to Wei's eye level, creating a more intimate space amid that crowd of 500 people. "Wei," Curry said softly, "you don't need to talk about anything that makes you uncomfortable. We're here just to have fun with basketball." But Wei shook his head, as if he had decided that keeping that secret any longer would be impossible. Marcus Williams, clinical psychologist who was present with his daughter, recognized that expression. It was the expression of someone who was about to open up about something they had been carrying alone for too long. "No, Mr. Curry," Wei said, and now tears rolled freely down his face. You deserve to know the truth. Everyone deserves to know why this moment is so important to me. Something that deeply touches is when a child demonstrates courage to speak their truth, even when that truth is painful. Ashley Williams, school counselor who had worked with children in difficult situations, felt her heart tighten as she recognized the signs of a revelation that would change everything. Today is our last day in the United States, Wei revealed, and the impact of his words was like a shock wave that silently swept through the gymnasium. Tomorrow morning, we return to China. Forever. The silence that followed was different from any other during that morning. It was no longer silence of expectation or admiration. It was the heavy silence that arises when people witness the exact moment when a dream is being shattered before their eyes. "Forever?" Curry asked, his own voice now loaded with a concern that transcended any sports competition. "Yes," Wei whispered, and there was a finality in his voice that made even the youngest children in the bleachers realize that something very serious was happening. My father sold our house in China to bring us here. He sold our car, the furniture, even my grandmother's jewelry. How is it possible that some revelations have the power to completely redefine the context of everything that happened before? Andrea Hall, journalist who had covered human stories for 20 years, felt tears sprouting in her own eyes as she realized the magnitude of the sacrifice being described. "He sold everything," Wei continued, "because I told him that my biggest dream was to meet Steph Curry. And my father said that if that was my dream, he would make it happen, no matter the cost." Naturally, this leads us to the moment that revealed the devastating depth of the family situation. Melissa Young, social worker who had worked with immigrant families, recognized in Wei's story a pattern she had seen many times: families betting everything on a dream, without a safety net. "We came to the United States 3 weeks ago," Wei revealed, "with the EDD hope that maybe I could get a scholarship, or that someone would notice my talent. My parents worked at any job they could find, cleaning, food delivery, dishwashing, to pay for our stay. It was impossible not to feel the emotional weight of those 3 weeks. Amy Robinson, nurse who had worked with underserved communities, could imagine the pressure an entire family had faced, working temporary jobs while trying to realize a dream that seemed increasingly distant. But the money ran out," Wei said, and now his voice broke completely. "Last night, my father told me we can't stay any longer. The return tickets are already bought. Tomorrow morning, at 6 o'clock, we take the plane back to Shenzhen." What would you feel if you discovered that a child had bet their entire family's last resources on a chance to meet you? Curry closed his eyes for a moment, clearly processing the enormity of what he was hearing. Kimberly King, mother of 3 children who was present, imagined what it would be like to have to look into her child's eyes and say that the dream was over. "And when we return," Wei continued, his words now interrupted by sobs, "we won't have a house. We won't have anything. My parents will have to start over from scratch, and it will all be my fault for having a dream too stupid for our reality." Great things happen when no one is looking. But sometimes the greatest tragedies also happen when a family risks everything for love, and reality proves more cruel than their wildest dreams. "Wei," Curry said, and there was raw emotion in his voice that made the entire gymnasium realize that something fundamental had changed. "This isn't your fault. Never, ever will it be your fault." Nicole Martinez, family therapist, observed the interaction with growing admiration. How is it possible that some people have natural wisdom to say exactly what needs to be said in the most crucial moments? But it is, Wei exploded, and now all the pressure and guilt he had kept for weeks finally found an outlet. I should have known it was impossible. I should have been more realistic. Now my parents have lost everything, and I couldn't even impress anyone. It was possible to perceive that this boy had carried an emotional weight that no child should carry. Katie Thompson, child psychologist specialized in family pressure, recognized in Wei's emotional explosion years of expectation and self-imposed responsibility. Wei, stop, Curry said firmly, but gently, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. Did you hear me? You just made 9 out of 10 three-point shots in front of 500 people. You speak English perfectly. You had the courage to challenge me publicly. You are extraordinary. Lauren Miller, educator who had worked with international students, was visibly moved. How many times in life do you witness someone receiving validation exactly when they need it most, from exactly the person whose opinion matters most? But it's not enough. Wei cried. It's not enough to save my family. It's not enough to justify what they sacrificed. When we return to China, I'll never be able to play basketball again because I'll need to work to help my parents rebuild everything they lost because of me. The impact of those words was devastating. It was possible to feel as if the gymnasium's air had become heavier, loaded with a collective sadness that touched every person present. Megan Garcia, founder of an organization that helped families in crisis, felt a familiar urgency. The urgency to act when we witness human injustice. 13 years, Wei whispered. 13 years, and my basketball career ends tomorrow because I wasn't good enough to get a real chance. It was impossible not to perceive that this moment had completely transcended any concept of sports competition. Christina Lopez, minister who worked with refugees and immigrants, recognized in Wei's story the universal suffering of families who risk everything for a better future, only to discover that courage and talent aren't always enough against systematic barriers. Curry stood up slowly, and it was possible to see that he was fighting against his own emotions. His hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from that intense emotion that arises when someone is confronted with genuine suffering and feels a deep responsibility to act. Wei, Curry said, and now there was something in his voice that made the entire gymnasium realize he was about to say something that would change everything. You said today is your last day in the United States? Yes, sir, Wei responded, wiping his tears, but still trembling from the emotional intensity of finally having shared his secret. And you said your family lost everything to realize your dream of meeting me? Yes, sir. Curry looked around the gymnasium, his eyes capturing 500 children who were witnessing that moment of raw vulnerability, then looked back at Wei with an intensity that made all the air seem electrically charged. Well, Curry said, and there was a resolution in his voice that made everyone realize something monumentally transformative was about to happen. Then, I think it's time to show you and your family what really happens when someone impresses Steph Curry. Great things happen when no one is looking, but sometimes the greatest transformations happen when someone with power chooses to use that power not to elevate themselves, but to elevate others, who dared to dream too big for their circumstances, proving that miracles are still possible when courage meets compassion. And it was then that the truth finally came to light. Steph Curry looked directly into Wei Zheng's eyes, and for a moment that seemed like an eternity, the entire gymnasium held its breath. It was possible to perceive that something monumentally transformative was processing in the athlete's mind. Not just a sports decision, but a decision that would change lives. Forever. "Way," Curry said, his voice now carrying an authority that transcended basketball and touched the essence of humanity. "Before I show you what it means to impress Steph Curry, I need to ask you a very important question. Have you ever wondered what it's like at the exact moment when a miracle is about to happen?" Rebecca White, event coordinator who had organized hundreds of charitable activities, felt an energy in the air that she had never experienced, as if the universe itself was aligning for something extraordinary. "If you could have anything in the world," Curry continued, "anything that would guarantee your family never suffers hardships again, that your parents never have to sacrifice their dreams for yours, what would it be?" Wei blinked several times, clearly surprised by the question. It was impossible not to feel that this wasn't a rhetorical question, but a genuine investigation into the deepest dreams of a child who had learned not to dream too big. I would like to be able to study basketball here in the United States," Wei responded hesitantly, "and for my parents to have a good life, without worrying about money. But I know that's impossible." Something that deeply touches is when someone expresses a dream with such purity that everyone around can visualize how beautiful it would be if that dream became reality. Danielle Harris, social worker who had worked with immigrant families for 15 years, felt tears sprouting in her eyes hearing the simplicity and goodness of that desire. "Way," Curry said, and now there was a smile on his face that mixed joy with a determination that made the entire gymnasium realize something miraculous was about to happen. "I have a proposal for you." Naturally, this leads us to the moment that completely redefined the meaning of victory and generosity. Curry turned to the silent crowd, his voice now projected so that every person present could hear clearly. "Everyone," Curry announced, "you just witnessed something we rarely see in sport or in life. You saw pure talent, absolute dedication, and a family that bet everything on a dream. And do you know what my responsibility is as someone who was fortunate enough to realize my own dreams?" Catherine Clark, sports journalist who had covered Curry's career for years, had her fingers flying over her phone, realizing she was documenting one of the most significant moments in modern sports history. "My responsibility," Curry continued, "is to ensure that talents like Way's aren't wasted due to lack of opportunity. My responsibility is to prove that basketball isn't just about competing. It's about elevating one another. What impresses most is how some people can transform individual moments into universal lessons about humanity." Brittany Lewis, physical education teacher who had brought her students to the event, was clearly moved by the depth of the message being transmitted. "Way," Curry said, returning his attention to the boy, who now observed him with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "I want you to know that today you didn't just impress me, you inspired me. And when Steph Curry gets inspired, extraordinary things happen." It was impossible not to feel that every word was being weighed with deep meaning. Vanessa Walker, documentarian who had captured inspiring stories throughout her career, recognized she was witnessing something that would be remembered for generations. "Starting today," Curry announced, and now his voice carried a conviction that made the entire gymnasium hold its breath. "I will completely sponsor your education in the United States. School, basketball training, housing, everything. And your family is officially invited to stay in the United States for as long as they want." The silence that followed was absolute for 3 complete seconds. 3 seconds in which Way's brain tried to process that his life had just completely changed. Then the gymnasium exploded in a cacophony of screams, applause, and crying that made the building itself seem to vibrate with pure emotion. How many times in life do you witness the exact moment when an impossible dream becomes reality? Andrea Hall, retired school counselor, had seen many children achieve important goals, but had never witnessed such a complete and instantaneous transformation. Wei fell to his knees in the middle of the court, his hands covering his face, while sobs of relief and gratitude took over his entire body. It was possible to perceive that years of pressure, fear, and responsibility were being released simultaneously through tears of pure joy. Is this real? Wei managed to ask between sobs, looking at Curry as if he were trying to confirm he wasn't dreaming. It's very real, Curry responded, kneeling beside Wei and placing a hand on his shoulder. But there's one condition. Melissa Young, who had worked with scholarship contracts for years, felt a moment of tension hearing the word condition. But something in Curry's expression suggested this would be a different condition from any other. The condition, Curry explained with a smile that radiated genuine warmth, is that when you become a professional player, not if, but when, you promise you'll do the same thing for another child who will be in your position today. How is it possible that a condition can simultaneously be a responsibility and a gift? Amy Robinson, founder of an organization that connected athletes with underprivileged youth, recognized in Curry's proposal a model that could transform how sport deals with talent development. I promise, Wei said, his voice still choked with emotion. I promise I'll help other children like me. I promise I'll remember this moment forever and pass this kindness forward. Great things happen when no one is looking. But sometimes the greatest transformations happen when someone with a platform chooses to use that platform not to promote themselves, but to create waves of kindness that will spread for generations. Now, Curry said, standing up and extending his hand to help Wei stand, let's finish our competition. But this time, let's play not to see who's better, but to celebrate that basketball just united two families, mine and yours. Nicole Martinez, psychologist who studied the impact of positive traumatic events, watched fascinated as Wei's body language had completely changed. Where there had been tension and fear before, now there was lightness and hope. A physical transformation of hope itself. The last shots of the competition were different from everything that had happened before. Curry deliberately missed his last 3 shots, not obviously, but subtly, ensuring that Wei officially won the competition. But everyone in the gymnasium knew this transcended any score. Wei Jiang, champion of the first Steph Curry International competition, Curry announced, raising Wei's hand like a victorious boxer. The crowd's roar was deafening, but there was something different in those applause. They were applause not just for a sports victory, but for a victory of humanity. Kimberly King, who had documented the event through photos, realized her images captured something much more significant than a basketball clinic. They documented the birth of a legend, not just sports-wise, but human. And do you know what the most beautiful part of all this is? Curry asked the crowd, which now included parents, organizers, and staff who had stopped everything to witness that historic moment. Katie Thompson, youth minister who had accompanied the event with her group of young people, leaned forward, knowing Curry was about to encapsulate the deeper meaning of what everyone had just witnessed. The most beautiful part, Curry said, is that Wei taught me today that true champions aren't defined by how many points they score or how many trophies they win. True champions are defined by how many people they elevate on their way to the top. It was possible to perceive that those words were being absorbed not just by the children present, but also by the adults who recognized they were witnessing a redefinition of what success means in modern sport. "Way," Curry said, turning to the boy who now smiled through tears of joy. "Thank you for reminding me why I really play basketball. It's not to be famous or make money. It's for moments like this, where sport allows us to change lives." Lauren Miller, educator who had dedicated her life to inspiring young people, felt she was witnessing a masterclass about leadership and compassion that she would use as an example for the rest of her career. How is it possible that an ordinary morning transforms into the type of story that people will tell their grandchildren? Perhaps because when talent meets determination, when dreams meet opportunity, and when power meets purpose, the result is something that transcends sport and touches the essence of what it means to be human. "And for everyone watching," Curry said, looking directly at the cameras that had captured every second of that transformative moment, "remember, great things happen when no one is looking. But the greatest happen when we choose to use our talents not just to elevate ourselves, but to elevate others who dared to dream too big for their circumstances." 6 months later, Wei Jiang would become the first Chinese student to receive a full scholarship at the Steph Curry Basketball Academy. 2 years later, he would break state records for three-point shooting. And in every interview, in every victory, he would tell the story of a morning in San Francisco where he learned that true greatness isn't about being the best, but about using your platform to help others discover their own greatness. Because in the end, that's the most beautiful lesson of all. That great things happen when no one is looking, but the greatest happen when someone is willing to transform a moment of competition into an opportunity to elevate a life, a family, and inspire an entire generation to believe that kindness and success can not only coexist, they amplify each other.